The UK has voted against holding early elections after passing a bill to prevent a no-deal Brexit. The Bahamas reels following the devastation left by Hurricane Durian. And Hong Kong's leader officially withdraws a controversial extradition bill that triggered months of violence. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. British MPs have dealt a second blow in one day to Prime Minister Boris Johnson after they voted against a proposal to hold early elections on October 15th. This came after they backed a bill to block a no-deal Brexit. The bill now has to be approved by the House of Lords and get the royal assent before it becomes law. It would then force the Prime Minister to ask the EU for an extension of the Brexit deadline if no deal is in place by then. Following the vote, Johnson scolded opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn for refusing to back his proposal.
I note that the leader of the opposition is once again not in his place in what I think is a slightly symbolic way. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying "Stop the election and stop the people from voting." I think there's only one solution. I think he has become the first, to my knowledge, the first leader of the opposition in the democratic history of our country to refuse the invitation to an election, Mr. Speaker. I can only speculate as to the reasons behind his hesitation, Mr. Speaker. The obvious conclusion is, I'm afraid, that he does not think he will win. And I urge his colleagues to reflect on what I think is the unsustainability of this position overnight and in the course of the next few days. Thank you.
7 people have died in the Bahamas due to Hurricane Durian, but the Bahamian Prime Minister has warned the death toll is expected to rise. Aerial videos show the horrifying extent of the devastation Durian caused in the Bahamas and specifically in the Abaco Islands. On Tuesday, Bahamian authorities evacuated about 20 critical patients from the Abaco Islands. Durian weakened to a Category 2 but grew in size as it moved away from Grand Bahama after battering that island for the past 48 hours. Debris extended for miles and floods covered much of the Abaco and Marsh Harbour in what the Prime Minister called one of the worst disasters in the nation's history. While the National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA, has issued the all clear for Abaco, Grand Bahama, Bimini and the Berry Islands, residents are cautioned to still be extremely careful as they move about. This as rescue efforts get underway. The U.S. Coast Guard is supporting NEMA and the island's defense force, who are leading search and rescue efforts. It is feared that many may have died in a community called The Mud, a shanty town of Haitian migrants in Abaco Island, which was virtually obliterated by the storm. Meanwhile, the Grand Bahama International Airport is in ruins after Durian and has been knocked out of commission. Earlier this week, a local lawmaker shared the dramatic footage of waves pounding the airport as it was swallowed up by floodwaters. The runway was barely visible. And in the wake of natural disasters, some Caribbean countries are taking decisive steps to determine how they can be climate resilient.
There is no compromise that can be justified for our environment. We can't replace the environment when we destroy it. So we're not going to compromise that. But what we do know is that the country stands a better chance of withstanding climate events and indeed preserving the environment when we have more of our infrastructure being planned than unplanned.
CARICOM chairman and Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Alan Chastanet, is pleading with the Caribbean region and the international community to rally in support of the Bahamas. Chastanet also pledged CARICOM support. Expressing sadness over the destruction, he recalled that at the last CARICOM summit held in St. Lucia in July, heads of government considered options for financing member states' actions to build resilience to the effects of climate change. He says this will be at the top of the agenda in the coming months. Meanwhile, the Caribbean Tourism Organization has activated its Hurricane Relief Fund to assist the archipelago. Now, after devastating the Bahamas, Durian is now moving northwards towards Florida's coast, and Floridians are already feeling the effects of the storm's wrath. It has already begun lashing the state's east coast with heavy rain, strong winds and waves slamming into the shore along Jensen Beach. 9 counties in Florida have issued mandatory evacuation orders. As of 10 a.m. East Coast time, the slow-moving storm is continuing its long crawl toward the southeast United States, now about 140 kilometers from the Florida coast, with slightly weakened winds. It is expected to turn towards Georgia and the Carolinas later this week. Moving on, St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves says he does not believe the regional private sector will pump funds into Liat Airlines operations. Gonsalves, whose government is also a shareholder, made the comment amidst discussions between majority shareholder Barbados and Antigua and Barbuda. Both are discussing how much Antigua is willing to pay for Barbados' share. However, Gonsalves does not believe selling the airline's shares will make any difference. He says what Liat actually needs is significant cash injections. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of Argentina to demonstrate against the government of President Mauricio Macri. On the streets of Buenos Aires, protesters carried banners slamming Macri's economic austerity policies and his deal with the IMF, which have led to rising poverty and mass layoffs. Citizens have also demanded proper living wages and measures to stop runaway inflation.
How much longer do we have to wait? How many more people will lose their jobs? How many children won't eat until the political class as a whole, not just the government, rolls up its sleeves and decides in a special session of Congress to move elections up? You can be in a country without a government, and this is no longer a government because the people have already revoked its mandate.
According to environmental activists in Brazil, increased encroachment by agriculture and illegal mining has contributed to the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Activists believe most of the wildfires currently ravaging the Amazon have been set on purpose to clear land for agricultural use. On top of this, the anti-environment rhetoric of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro has encouraged such activities since he came into power in January. About 80% of the fires have been put out after burning for over a month.
There are some laws here called the Agrarian Regularization that allow someone who has occupied land for a certain amount of time to carry out ranching, farming, cattle raising activities. That gives them a right over those public lands. So there's a time when that restricts the ability to protect the environment. And there are times like now, with the economic crisis, when they think that you have to let people work and that you have to let them harvest wood, you have to let them farm, raise cattle at any cost, even at the cost of destroying the forest.
Meanwhile, the UN Human Rights High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet says the Brazilian government should act decisively to halt the invasion of indigenous territories in the Amazon rainforest.
On Amazonia, one of the concerns that we have, that 33% of the fires, I'm not saying that they're intentional, but I'm just mentioning that are in indigenous protected places or conservation land. So indigenous people are having tough time on this. And some of them have been killed but because of they have been protecting their land and they have been killed. But different people. I mean, some small miners who want to, use the land for other kind of reasons and so on. So we are concerned and we're following up, and we hope that this situation can be taken seriously and that recommendations that we can provide will be implemented.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The most important natural reserve in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, is being threatened by the construction of a multi-million-dollar housing project. But it's not simply the vegetation and biodiversity that is in danger, but also a clear water source that provides water to 30% of the city.
La Tigra National Park extends for 24,000 hectares and is Tegucigalpa's main source of clean water and air. But now, it's in danger thanks to the approval of a housing project to build within.
This zone is the main water source of the capital city. It is rich, very rich in vegetation, and there are numerous communities that live inside as well.
But it's not just the communities inside the park who are in danger, but also close to 1 million people who depend on the park for their drinking water.
This project cannot be approved in La Tigra. That's according to the law. And even if we have no laws to protect the environment, common sense dictates that we must protect water sources.
Tegucigalpa's has worsened over the past few months. Many neighbors have only been receiving water once a week. Therefore, the construction of this housing project will be catastrophic.
Close to 1,000 hectares will be affected. It'd be a great ecological disaster. If this protected area is deforested, the water here will start to dry up.
The housing project includes 1,700 homes, 9 shopping centers, and a hospital has started construction, as those behind it say nothing will stop them.
Shifting gears now, Pope Francis has arrived in Mozambique as he kicks off a 3-nation tour of African countries. Hundreds gathered at Maputo's airport to welcome him, chanting, "Viva to our Pope Francisco, you are welcome to Mozambique, prophet of reconciliation." The Pope is expected to discuss the country's fragile peace process, the devastation caused by 2 cyclones earlier this year, and the upcoming general election. He will also visit Madagascar and Mauritius during his tour.
It is with a lot of happiness that we're here to receive Pope Francis. Last time he was here I was a child, 6 years old. Today I'm older and I'm feeling hopeful about this visit. He comes at the right moment where the country has just signed a peace agreement that brings hopes to all Mozambican people.
2 bodies, burnt beyond recognition, have been discovered inside gutted shops in Johannesburg in the aftermath of looting at the Pan-Africa Mall. The grim discovery was made while rubble and debris was being removed from the location. Police say 5 people were killed and at least 189 have been arrested so far during the violence that flared up on Sunday and spread. Although the exact circumstances surrounding their deaths are still unclear, the latest gruesome discovery could push the death toll higher. The new wave of xenophobic attacks was reportedly sparked by the killing of a South African taxi driver last week in Pretoria. The presidents of Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo and Malawi have boycotted the World Economic Forum on Africa hosted by South Africa in the face of ongoing looting and burning of small businesses owned by African immigrants. Our correspondent Matuba Malachi tells us more.
South Africa has managed to stay in the headlines over the past few days, global headlines even, but it's not for good reasons. It's about the attacks on migrants that we've seen unfolding over the past few days in Pretoria and here in Johannesburg. And it has also caused some political rifts among leaders here on the African continent. There is a World Economic Forum taking place in Cape Town, and it was supposed to be attended by most African leaders, but we know that the president of Malawi and the president of the DRC is among the presidents who pulled out of coming into South Africa for that very important meeting. And President Paul Kagame of Rwanda is also one of the presidents who pulled out of coming to South Africa for the World Economic Forum. And the tensions have spilled over into the entertainment industry as well. We've seen Nigerian artists tweeting and saying they are pulling out of some of their gigs which were supposed to happen in the next coming days in South Africa. Some of the biggest events on the entertainment calendar here in South Africa will be without some of the acts from Nigeria because of the attacks on migrants that have been happening in South Africa. And we've seen these artists tweeting that South Africa is not acting fast enough, and the attacks on migrants have been continuing for far too long without being nipped. In some of the biggest events on the entertainment calendar here in South Africa will be without some of the acts from Nigeria because of the attacks on migrants that have been happening in South Africa. And we've seen these artists tweeting that South Africa is not acting fast enough, and the attacks on migrants have been continuing for far too long without being nipped in the bud. President Cyril Ramaphosa came out today from Cape Town reiterating his message and calling on all Africans in South Africa to be one and unite and stop the violence that's been unfolding here in South Africa. It's back to you, studio.
Matuba Malachi, our correspondent in South Africa, with that report. Nigerians living in South Africa are urging the government and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to guarantee their safety.
We call on South African government to do more to stop the current attacks from spreading to other areas. We call on Nigerian government and other African countries leaders to take collective efforts in engaging our host country, South Africa, and its government to find a better way to prevent this kind of inhuman acts from occurring going forward.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, and as an act of retaliation for the violence in South Africa, scores of protesters have clashed with police in Abuja near a South African-owned supermarket. Demonstrators burned tires and hurled rocks outside a mall in Abuja, where a branch of the ShopRite supermarket is located, before being repelled by police. This comes following a spate of reprisal xenophobic attacks on foreigners and foreign-owned businesses in Nigeria. Foreigners in South Africa have been accused of taking jobs away from South Africans. And thousands of university students protested outside the South African embassy in Lusaka, Zambia, to denounce xenophobic attacks in Johannesburg. Zambia's Football Association also striked by cancelling a friendly match against South Africa that was scheduled to take place on Saturday.
Shouldn't be killed like that, the way they are being killed. No, it shouldn't happen like that. So this is why I want to fight.
Let's uplift the spirit of Pan-Africanism Ubuntu. So students in Zambia have condemned this, and we're going to demonstrate today later.
Social movements in Panama have been demonstrating against the government's plans to raise the retirement age and social security contributions. The reforms are being backed by international lenders and local businesses.
This is how members of social movements protested in front of Panama's National Assembly to demand the government cancel its plan to raise the retirement age and social security contributions.
The capitalist organizations want to keep stealing from the Panamanian people by imposing measures like the increase in the retirement age and this attack on the Social Security Fund. And we are here to keep fighting to stop them. If they pass the bill, we are going to fight.
After he was sworn in July, Panama's president, Laurentino Cortizo, invited the International Monetary Fund to help him boost the economy. The IMF is proposing an increase in the retirement to between 65 and 70 for both men and women, and pension contributions would go up from 240 to 300. This means people would need to pay contributions for 25 years instead of the current 20 years. What's more, pensions would be calculated on the basis of the 10 best years of contribution and 37% of the total. At the moment, they are based on 60% of your final pay.
It's not acceptable the politicians who have dipped into the Social Security Fund as if they were their own petty cash now come along and raise the retirement age and pension contributions. This is not on. We have to go back to a system that benefits all the Panamanian people.
The pension reform is promoted by business associations like the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, whose members owe more than $300 million in social security payments.
We won't allow those corrupt officials who have bankrupted the Social Security Fund to tell us what we have to do. The people will take to the streets to defend the Social Security and demand a constituent assembly.
Over 70% of the population depend on the retirement pensions from the public social security system. That is why these changes would be a big blow to the living standard of most Panamanians.
Coming up after the break, Palestinian women are protesting for their rights. Don't touch that remote.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transformed the world today. On Monday, only on TeleSur.
Welcome back. Hundreds of Palestinians rallied in the West Bank on Wednesday to demand legal protection for women against violence. Protests have been ongoing since the region saw the death of a 21-year-old woman last month in what women's rights groups say was a so-called honor killing. This week, the Prime Minister said several people had been detained for questioning over the woman's death. According to officials, at least 18 Palestinian women have been killed this year by family members angered over perceived damage to their honor.
Here to say enough is enough. We've lost enough women. Enough victims have
died, have been killed, have been tortured, raped, harassed, and still there's no justice. So we have to demand justice for every victim ever. That's why we have the names of all the victims who were killed.
The fact that it's 2019 and that in Palestine our legal system is still structured in a way to allow murderers like the murderers of Israa al-Gharaib to get away with this is appalling. The fact that it can happen in a hospital where it's supposed to be a safe space with no one saying a word is even more appalling. This is why I was so angry.
At least 23 people have been killed and a further 16 injured in a large explosion at a fireworks factory in northern India. The explosion on Wednesday caused the building to catch fire and collapse in Batala, a town in Punjab state outside of New Delhi. Rescuers were fighting the blaze and searching for further survivors. Local authorities warned that the death toll could rise. Shifting gears now, Hong Kong has formally withdrawn a controversial extradition bill which triggered months of violent protests. Hong Kong's chief executive said the move is intended to put to rest public concerns. The bill would have allowed the extradition of suspected criminals wanted abroad, including Taiwan, Macau and mainland China, in hopes of preventing Hong Kong from becoming a safe haven for criminals. Citizens helped massive protests when the bill was first introduced, but they quickly developed into chaos with the help of a right-wing local media tycoon who has close ties to hardliners in Washington, D.C.
This has led to controversies. The government of Special Administrative Region will officially withdraw the bill and eradicate the worries of people. The security chief will propose a motion to withdraw the bill after the legislative meeting is back. All the people of Hong Kong, the lingering violence is damaging the very foundation of Hong Kong because a small group of people is trying to challenge the principles of one country, two systems by damaging the properties of the central government based in Hong Kong, burning and damaging national flags and emblems. This action is pushing Hong Kong towards a highly dangerous situation.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet.